The grease on the counter was stubborn, but Mama Rose was stubborner. Her hands, mapped with the burns, calluses, and cuts of 40 years behind a flat-top grill, moved in a slow, rhythmic circle. The rag was gray, the water was lukewarm, but the pride was burning hot. It was a Tuesday morning, the kind that smelled of stale coffee and rain on asphalt. The kind of morning that usually signaled a slow drift until the lunch rush. But today, the silence in the diner felt heavy. It wasn't peaceful. It was holding its breath. Rose wasn't just cleaning. She was preserving. She picked up the plate sitting by the register. It was a simple thing, white ceramic with a faded gold rim that had largely been scrubbed away by decades of sponge and soap. It was the last one from the original set she'd bought when she was 22. Back when the sign out front was freshly painted and didn't flicker with a dying neon hum. She polished it carefully, treating the cheap china like a museum artifact. That plate had held pancakes for truck drivers who couldn't pay, birthday slices of apple pie for kids who had no one else to celebrate with, and midnight eggs for runaways shivering from the cold. It held the ghost of every meal she had ever served with love. The bell above the door chimed, a cheerful little ring that sounded violently out of place. Rose didn't look up immediately. She knew the heavy, confident footsteps. They didn't shuffle like the regulars. They clicked. Expensive leather on worn linoleum. Inspector Blake stopped right in front of her. He smelled of harsh cologne and new money. He placed a heavy briefcase on the counter, right over the spot she had just wiped clean. He didn't sit. Sitting implied he was staying, and Blake was a man who only paused long enough to destroy things. "You're still cleaning, Rose," Blake said. His voice was smooth, lacking any jagged edges of empathy. "That's optimistic." Rose finally looked up. Her eyes were tired, framed by wrinkles that deepened when she frowned. She didn't speak. She just held the plate against her apron, clutching it like a shield. Blake sighed, a theatrical exhale meant to show he was bored with this routine. He checked his watch, a gold piece that caught the dull overhead light. It's 10 a.m. The demolition crew is on a tight schedule. They eat lunch at 12, and they like to eat it watching a building fall. I need the keys, and I need this place empty. "This is my home, Mr. Blake," Rose said, her voice quiet but steady. "The deed is in my name. My husband built these booths with his own hands." "The city exercised eminent domain 3 months ago, Rose. We've been over this. The new casino needs a parking lot. Progress doesn't care about your husband's carpentry." Blake leaned in, his smile tight and devoid of warmth. "And frankly, neither does the bank. You're underwater. We're doing you a favor." Rose's grip on the plate tightened until her knuckles turned the color of old parchment. "I'm not leaving. My boys, they know this place. If they come back, this is where they'll look." Blake laughed. It was a short, sharp bark of a sound. "The orphans? The strays you fed scraps to 20 years ago? They're gone, Rose. Dead in jail, or they forgot you the second they walked out that door. Nobody's coming." He looked at the plate in her hand with genuine disdain. To him, it was just old trash in a building scheduled to become rubble. To him, sentimentality was just a weakness that delayed business. "Let's stop pretending," Blake said. He reached out, not to take the keys, but to make a point. With a flick of his wrist, casual, bored, like he was shooing away a fly, he backhanded the plate Rose was holding. It happened in slow motion for Rose. The ceramic slipped from her fingers. Gravity took over, pulling the memory toward the hard, unforgiving ground. The sound of the impact was sickening. It wasn't a clean break. It was an explosion of sound, that cut through the jazz music playing softly from the jukebox. The plate shattered into a dozen jagged shards, scattering across the black and white checkerboard floor. The noise echoed off the metal napkin holders and the empty stools, amplifying the violence of the act. Rose stood frozen. She didn't scream. She didn't cry out. She just stared at the white fragments near her orthopedic shoes. It felt like he had just slapped her child. The silence that followed was deafening. Even the hum of the refrigerator seemed to stop in shock. "Oops," Blake said, his face flat, unbothered. He pulled a handkerchief from his pocket and dabbed his hands, as if touching her property had soiled him. "Pack it up, old woman. If you're not out when the dozers get here, I'll have the sheriff drag you out. And he won't be as polite as I am." He turned on his heel, his shoes crunching slightly over a piece of the broken porcelain, grinding the white ceramic into dust as he walked out the door. The bell chimed again, mocking the devastation he left behind. Rose was alone. The smell of the diner seemed to change instantly, shifting from the comfort of coffee to the bitter scent of defeat. She fell to her knees, not to pray, but to pick up the pieces. Her hands shook as she reached for a sharp shard of the gold-rimmed china, the edge cutting slightly into her thumb. A single drop of blood welled up, bright red against the white shard, mixing with the dust on the floor. Outside, the low mechanical growl of a heavy engine started up. The bulldozers were warming up. Rose didn't stand up immediately. She stayed on the linoleum for a long moment, gathering the shards of the broken plate into the pocket of her apron. The sharp edges poked against her hip through the fabric, a physical reminder of the ache in her chest. When she finally hauled herself up, her knees popped, a sound of protest from a body that had spent too many years standing on hard floors. She walked behind the counter, not to the register, but to the wall beside the kitchen swing door. To anyone else, it looked like a fire hazard. A collage of yellowing paper, napkins, and torn notebook pages taped up in chaotic layers. But to Rose, this was the ledger. Her fingers trembled as she brushed against a receipt dated 15 years ago. "I owe you 2 grilled cheeses. We'll pay when Dad gets a job." It was signed in clumsy crayon. Next to it was a napkin with a lipstick stain. "Thanks for the coffee and the talk. You saved my life tonight." Blake called this place a liability. He saw rotting wood and grease traps. He didn't see that Mama Rose's diner was a bank, and she was the wealthiest woman in town, if kindness was currency. She had fed the town's unwanted, the layoffs, the runaway teenagers who needed a booth to hide in until the sun came up. She had never asked for money when she saw the hollow look of hunger in their eyes. She just fed them. And now the world was coming to collect, but not in the way she had hoped. The front door opened again. This time, the air didn't just shift, it chilled. Inspector Blake was back, but he wasn't alone. A woman walked in beside him, her heels clicking a sharp, aggressive staccato that made the regulars. Old Stan in the corner booth and a young nurse with dark circles under her eyes. Look up from their mugs. Cynthia Blake was a woman who looked like she was wrapped in plastic, perfect hair, perfect skin, and a coat that cost more than the diner made in a year. She didn't step into the room. She inspected it. Her nose wrinkled slightly, a reflex of disgust she didn't bother to hide, as if the very air of the diner was contagious. "Is this it?" Cynthia asked, her voice high and thin. She looked at the red vinyl booths, cracked and taped over with duct tape, as if they were infected. "Good Lord, Richard. You said it was a dump, but this is a health hazard." "It's almost over, darling," Blake said, placing a possessive hand on her back. Just wanted you to see the site before we level it. The architect needs to know the grade of the land." Rose stood by the coffee pot. Her instinct, honed over decades, overrode her anger. Someone was in her house. You offer them a drink. It was muscle memory. It was who she was. She poured a glass of ice water, the cubes clinking against the glass, and set it on the counter in front of Cynthia. "It's a hot day," Rose said, her voice raspy. "Water's cold." Cynthia looked at the glass. She didn't touch it. She looked at the condensation weeping down the side, then up at Rose's hands. Red, swollen, with fingernails cut short and practical. "I don't drink tap water," Cynthia said. She didn't sound angry. She sounded amused, which was worse. "Especially not from pipes that probably haven't been changed since the war. It smells like rust and failure." She reached out with a manicured finger and pushed the glass away. It slid across the counter, leaving a wet streak, and teetered on the edge before Rose caught it. In the corner booth, old Stan slammed his hand on the table. He started to rise, his face flushing red. He was a retired steelworker, hands like sledgehammers, but his legs were gone. He struggled to get up, wheezing. "Sit down, Stan," Blake warned, not even turning his head. Two security guards, thick-necked men in dark polos who had slipped in quietly, stepped forward from the doorway. They blocked the light, casting long shadows over the nurse and the old man. The diner was now a cage. Rose waved a hand at Stan, a silent plea for him to stay put. She wouldn't let anyone get hurt for her. Not today. "You have the deed, Mr. Blake," Rose said, wiping the wet streak from the counter. "You have the law. Do you need to have the cruelty too?" Blake laughed, checking his watch again. "Cruelty is a perspective, Rose. We're offering you a release. Look at you." He gestured vaguely at her, encompassing her stained apron, her gray hair, the way she leaned against the counter for support. "You're tired. You're done. The nursing home on Elm Street has a bed open, state-subsidized. You can sit by a window and watch TV. Let the people who actually build things take over." The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Nursing home. Done. He was telling her that her utility to the world had expired, that she was just another piece of debris to be swept away for a parking lot. By the jukebox, a teenage boy in a hooded sweatshirt sat unnoticed. He held his phone low, pressed against his chest, the camera lens peering out like a silent eye. He wasn't streaming. He was recording. He zoomed in on Rose's face, the way her lip trembled, not with fear, but with the immense effort of holding back a lifetime of dignity that was being stripped away, layer by layer. Rose looked at the wall of receipts one last time. She thought of the faces that went with them. The boys who ran away from violent fathers. The girls who needed a safe place to do homework. "My boys won't like this," Rose whispered. It was a thought spoken aloud, faint and fragile. Cynthia let out a sharp, incredulous laugh. "Oh, honey, we've heard about your imaginary children. If they existed, they would have bought this place years ago. You're all alone. Acceptance is the first step to moving on." 12 o'clock, Rose," Blake interrupted, his tone final. "If you're not out, the dozers will push you out along with the walls." He turned to leave, his wife linking arms with him, stepping carefully to avoid the grease stains on the floor. They walked out like royalty, leaving a stable. Rose stood in the silence they left behind. The hum of the refrigerator kicked on, a lonely mechanical rattle. She looked at the glass of water Cynthia had rejected. She picked it up and poured it into the sink. Down the drain, she thought. Just like everything else. But then, the bell above the door didn't chime. It didn't ring. It stayed silent because the door didn't open. Instead, a low rumble began to vibrate through the floorboards. Not the bulldozers. This was different. It was the deep, throat-clearing growl of an engine, but not a construction truck. It was smoother. Closer. Rose looked up. Through the front window, beyond the closed sign she had refused to turn, a shadow fell over the entrance. Someone was standing on the other side of the glass. The door didn't slam open. There was no grand entrance, no trumpet fanfare to announce a rescue. The bell simply gave a weak, tired ding, the same sound it had made for 40 years. A young man stepped out of the drizzle and onto the mat. He shook his head, sending a spray of rainwater onto the floor. He wore a gray hoodie pulled up over a baseball cap and jeans that had seen better days. He kept his head down, hands buried deep in his pockets, moving with the shuffling gait of someone who was used to being invisible. Blake, who was halfway to the door with his wife, paused. He looked the newcomer up and down, his lip curling in a reflex of distaste. To Blake, this was just another stray cat looking for a saucer of milk before the building came down. "We're closed," Blake said, not bothering to stop walking. "Read the sign, kid. Place is condemned." The man in the hoodie didn't flinch. He didn't even look at Blake. He walked past the inspector as if he were a ghost, moving straight to the counter. He took the stool furthest to the left, the one with the rip in the vinyl that Rose had patched with silver duct tape back in '05. He sat down, the leather creaking under his weight. He placed his hands on the counter. They were clean, Rose noticed, but they were shaking slightly. "I'll take the special, Mama Rose," the man said. His voice was low, rough, like gravel shifting in a stream bed. "Burnt edges on the grilled cheese, just how you used to make it when it rained." Rose froze. Her hand hovered over the dish rag. The request was specific. Too specific. Burnt edges. That wasn't on the menu. That was a secret code for the kids who needed extra comfort, the ones who liked the crunch because it reminded them of something solid in a world that felt liquid and slipping away. She squinted at him, trying to find a face beneath the shadow of the hood, but the brim of his cap hid his eyes. "Kitchen's cold, son," Rose said softly. "Gas is off. They're tearing us down in..." She glanced at the clock on the wall. 40 minutes. "I can wait," the man said. Blake stopped. His ego, fragile and easily bruised by being ignored, flared up. He turned back, leaving his wife by the door. "You deaf?" Blake snapped, stepping back into the room. "I said get out. You're trespassing on city property now. This isn't a soup kitchen anymore." The man in the hoodie didn't turn. He just picked up a napkin holder and turned it over in his hands, studying the chrome. Before Blake could take another step, the bell chimed again. This time, the door was pushed open with a heavy, metallic thud. A woman stepped in. She was dressed in high-visibility construction gear, her orange vest stained with grease and red clay. She wore heavy steel-toed boots that left muddy prints on the floor. A hard hat dangled from her hand, and her hair was pulled back in a messy, utilitarian bun. She looked like she had just walked off a jackhammer shift. She didn't look at Rose. She didn't look at the menu. She walked straight to the stool next to the man in the hoodie and sat down. "Coffee," she said. Her voice was tired but firm. "Black, in the chipped mug if you still have it." Blake stared. "What is this? A reunion for the labor union?" He scoffed, looking at his security guards. "Get them out. Now." The guards took a step forward, their hands resting on their belts. But the door opened a third time. The air in the room seemed to get heavier, denser. The man who entered was large, broad-shouldered, filling the doorway. He wore a leather motorcycle jacket that had faded to gray at the elbows. His neck was a canvas of ink, tattoos creeping up from his collar to his jawline. Snakes, daggers, symbols that made people cross the street to avoid him. He didn't walk. He prowled. He moved past Blake without acknowledging his existence, the air around him smelling of rain and stale tobacco. He took the third stool. He placed a pack of gum on the counter. "Don't let them bully you, Mama," the tattooed man said. His voice was deep, a bass note that vibrated through the countertop. He looked at the broken shards of the plate still resting in Rose's apron pocket, visible through the thin fabric. "You dropped something." Rose felt a sudden, sharp ache behind her eyes. Mama. Nobody had called her that in 20 years. Not since the state foster system changed the rules, not since the neighborhood gentrified and the families moved away. She looked at the three of them. A drifter, a construction worker, and a thug. They looked like the very people society, and men like Blake, had spent a lifetime discarding. They looked like the broken plate on the floor, jagged, rough, and worthless to the naked eye. Blake's patience snapped. "All right, that's it. Officer," he shouted toward the door, where a bored-looking sheriff's deputy was leaning against his cruiser. "We have squatters. Removal. Now." The man in the hoodie finally turned. He moved slowly, pivoting on the stool. He didn't stand up. He just looked at Blake. "You're making a lot of noise for a man who doesn't own the land yet," the hooded man said. "Excuse me?" Blake's face went red. "I have the demolition order right here, signed by the mayor." "Paper?" the tattooed man grunted, not looking up from the counter. "Paper burns." "You threaten me?" Blake stepped forward, pointing a manicured finger at the biker's chest. "You have any idea who I am? I can have you arrested for breathing in my direction." The woman in the construction vest finally looked up. Her eyes were piercing, intelligent, and startlingly familiar to Rose. There was a scar above her left eyebrow, a thin white line. Rose remembered that line. A fall from the swing set, 1998. A little girl named Sarah who cried not because of the blood, but because she tore her Sunday dress. Rose's breath caught in her throat. "We know exactly who you are, Mr. Blake," the woman said. She reached into her dirty vest pocket. Blake expected a weapon. The guards tensed, but she didn't pull out a knife. She pulled out a phone. She placed it on the counter, screen up. It was recording. "The question is," the woman continued, her voice losing its tired edge and becoming sharp, surgical, "do you know who we are?" Outside, the rain began to fall harder, drumming against the roof like 1,000 fingers tapping in anticipation. The bulldozers revved their engines, a monstrous roar that shook the windows. But inside, the silence was absolute. The three strangers sat in a row, a human barricade between the old woman and the world that wanted to erase her. They didn't look like heroes. They looked like trouble. And for the first time that morning, Blake looked unsure. He looked at the tattoos, the mud, the cheap hoodie, and he felt a cold prickle of unease crawl up his spine. He couldn't place it. But something about the way they sat, so still, so anchored, suggested that they weren't just customers. They were waiting for a signal. The deputy sheriff, a man named Miller, who had spent 20 years writing parking tickets and avoiding real trouble, stepped through the doorway. He looked at Blake, then at the three strangers sitting at the counter. He rested his hand on his holster, not drawing, just resting, a habit born of nervousness rather than authority. All right, folks. Miller sighed, the rain dripping from the brim of his hat. Mr. Blake here says you're trespassing. Let's not make this a YouTube video. Move along. The man in the hoodie stopped spinning the napkin holder. He placed his hands flat on the counter. Trespassing implies we don't belong here, Deputy. Blake scoffed, checking his phone. You don't. This property is city assets now. You're loitering in a demolition zone. Assets, the hooded man repeated. He stood up. He didn't rush. He unfolded his frame with a slow, deliberate grace that made the diner feel suddenly smaller. He reached up and pulled back his hood. The face underneath wasn't the weather-beaten visage of a drifter. It was clean-shaven, sharp-jawed, and tired in the way that only people who sleep 4 hours a night are tired. It was a face that had been on the cover of Time magazine 2 months ago. It was a face that looked down from the giant billboards on the highway entering the city. Blake's mouth opened, but the insult died in his throat. He blinked, his brain struggling to reconcile the cheap hoodie with the recognition firing in his synapses. That's, Cynthia whispered, her hand flying to her pearl necklace. Richard, that's Gabriel Vance. Gabriel Vance, the tech mogul who had revolutionized logistics software, the man whose company had just bought the old steel mill to turn it into a distribution hub, the man who was currently the city's largest single taxpayer. Gabriel didn't look at Cynthia. He looked at Rose. His eyes softened, the hard edge of the CEO melting into something younger, more vulnerable. Hi, Mama, Gabriel said gently. Sorry I'm late. Traffic from the airport was a nightmare. Rose pressed her hand to her mouth. She didn't see a billionaire. She saw a scrawny 12-year-old boy named Gabe, who used to sit in that exact booth, doing his math homework under the dim light because his father had cut the power at home again. Gabe, she whispered, you got tall. And you got bullied, Gabriel said, his voice hardening as he turned back to Blake. You called me a stray, Mr. Blake? Blake stammered. The power dynamic in the room didn't just shift, it capsized. Mr. Vance, I didn't realize you were acquainted with the owner. We're just following city protocol. It's a standard eviction. Standard, the woman in the dirty construction vest echoed. She spun her stool around. She didn't take off a mask. She simply reached into her vest pocket and pulled out a lanyard. It dangled from her finger, swinging like a pendulum. The ID card was laminated and bore the logo of Apex Construction, the massive firm contracted to build the casino Blake was so proud of. Under her name, Sarah Jenkins. The title was bold and clear. Chief Project Engineer. You might want to check your texts, Richard, Sarah said, her voice dry. I just sent a stop work order to the foreman outside. Those dozers aren't moving an inch until I sign off on the geological stability report. Blake's phone buzzed in his pocket. He ignored it, his face paling. You work for the contractor? You're blocking your own project? I'm the reason the project exists, Sarah corrected, standing up. She wiped a smudge of red clay from her cheek. And I don't dig graves for my childhood home. I told you the ground here was unstable. You didn't listen. Now you're going to listen. She looked at Rose, and the tough exterior of the site manager cracked. She looked at the little girl who used to scrape her knees playing in the back alley. I couldn't let them take the kitchen, Mama. I still haven't learned how to make the apple pie. Blake looked like he was having a heart attack. He turned desperately to the third man, the biker, the thug, the terrifying wall of muscle and ink sitting at the end of the counter. Surely this one was just hired muscle. Surely this one was a mistake. "And who are you?" Blake demanded, his voice cracking. "Their bodyguard?" The tattooed man laughed. It was a deep rumble of a laugh. He stood up, towering over everyone, unzipped his leather jacket. Underneath, he wasn't wearing a gang patch. He was wearing a crisp, white Oxford shirt, the top button undone, tucked into tailored slacks. The tattoos on his neck stopped cleanly at the collar line, hidden when he wore a tie. He reached into the inner pocket of his jacket and pulled out a folded document. He didn't hand it to Blake. He handed it to the deputy sheriff. "Deputy Miller," the man said. His diction was precise, educated, the kind of voice that commanded courtrooms. "I believe you'll find this is a temporary restraining order granted by Judge Holloway 20 minutes ago, citing irregularities in the eminent domain filing. Specifically, the failure to disclose a conflict of interest regarding Mr. Blake's wife sitting on the zoning board." Miller looked at the paper, then at the man. "Marcus? Marcus King?" "That's Attorney King to the opposing counsel," Marcus said with a sharp grin. "Civil Rights Division. I usually handle death row appeals. But for Mr. Blake, I made an exception. Marcus King, the pit bull of the state bar. The lawyer you called when you wanted to sue the government and win." Blake stepped back, hitting the door frame. He looked at the three of them, the billionaire, the engineer, and the lawyer. The hoodie, the hard hat, and the leather jacket. He had judged them by their covers, and now the book was being thrown at him. This is a setup," Blake whispered. "You planned this." "We didn't plan anything," Gabriel said, stepping closer, his expensive sneakers crunching on the dust of the broken plate. "We just came home for lunch." Gabriel looked down at the floor, at the white shards Rose had tried to clean up. His jaw tightened. "You broke a plate, Blake," Gabriel said softly. "My mother loved that plate." It was an accident," Blake stammered, sweat beading on his forehead. "No," Marcus interrupted, crossing his massive arms. "An accident is when you drop something. What you did was negligence. And in my experience, negligence is very, very expensive." The diner was silent again, but it wasn't the silence of defeat anymore. It was the silence of a predator realizing it had walked into a den of lions. "Mama," Sarah said, ignoring Blake entirely. "Is the grill still hot?" Rose blinked, tears finally spilling over. I can turn it on." "Good," Gabriel said, sitting back down on his stool and spinning it to face the terrified inspector. "Because we're not leaving until we eat. And you, Mr. Blake, are going to wait right there while we discuss the terms of your surrender." The silence in the diner was no longer heavy. It was sharp, brittle, waiting to snap. Richard Blake stood by the counter, his expensive suit suddenly looking like a costume that didn't fit. He was a man accustomed to boardrooms and backroom handshakes, places where power was quiet and negotiated. He was not used to this. The raw, exposed feeling of being outmaneuvered in front of an audience. His phone buzzed again, a persistent vibration against his thigh that seemed to echo in the quiet room. He didn't answer it, but the screen lit up in his hand. Caller ID. The mayor. "You're bluffing," Blake whispered, though the sweat gathering at his hairline told a different story. "You think you can just walk in here and overturn a municipal project because you have money? This is a legal contract." Marcus, the giant in the leather jacket, didn't even look up from his inspection of the menu. "It was a contract," he corrected, his voice bored. "Now it's evidence. I have a paralegal filing a discovery motion right now regarding the zoning bribes. By the time you get back to your office, Mr. Blake, the only thing you'll be building is a criminal defense." By the jukebox, the teenage boy with the phone shifted his weight. He wasn't hiding the camera anymore. He held it high, steady. On his screen, the live stream view count was ticking upward. Hundreds, then thousands. The comments were scrolling so fast, they were a blur of anger and shock. The narrative had already escaped the room. Blake wasn't just losing a building. He was losing his reputation in real time. Cynthia Blake saw the phone. She saw the little red live icon. Her face, usually a mask of composed disdain, crumbled into pure panic. To her, social death was far worse than any lawsuit. "Richard," she hissed, grabbing his arm. Her nails dug into his sleeve. "We are leaving, now." "Not yet," Blake snapped, trying to salvage a shred of authority. "I want to see the—" "Richard." Her voice went shrill, cracking the tension. "Look at the phone. You're trending." Blake looked. He saw the kid. He saw the red light. And for the first time, the arrogance drained out of him completely, leaving behind something small and pathetic. He looked at Gabriel, sitting calmly on the stool, playing with a salt shaker. He looked at Sarah, wiping grease from her hard hat. He looked at Marcus, who smiled a smile that promised absolute destruction. He realized then that he wasn't fighting three people. He was fighting a memory that had armed itself. "This isn't over," Blake muttered, the standard line of a defeated man, but it lacked any real weight. It sounded hollow, like a dry leaf crunched underfoot. "It is," Gabriel said. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "And take your wife with you. She's getting mud on my floor." My floor. The possession in those two words was absolute. Blake turned. He didn't storm out. He retreated. He fumbled with the door handle, his coordination betraying him, before stumbling out into the rain. Cynthia followed, shielding her face with her purse, not from the water, but from the camera lens. As the door swung shut, cutting off the view of their retreat, the diner exhaled. The tension vanished, replaced by a sudden, overwhelming rush of reality. The nurse at the back table let out a breath she'd been holding for 10 minutes. Stan, the steelworker, slapped his hand on the table again, but this time it was a sound of victory, a thick, joyous thud. "Well, I'll be damned," Stan wheezed, a grin splitting his weathered face. The cavalry came. But Rose didn't cheer. She stood frozen behind the counter, her hands gripping the cold stainless steel edge to keep her knees from buckling. The adrenaline was fading, leaving her lightheaded. She looked at the three adults sitting in front of her. The billionaire, the engineer, the lawyer. She didn't see the suits or the vest. She looked at Marcus and saw a scared 16-year-old boy with a bruised eye, sitting in that exact seat, refusing to talk because he didn't trust anyone. She had given him a free milkshake and told him, "You're safe here, son." She looked at Sarah and saw a skinny girl doing homework at table 4, trying to hide her grades because she thought she wasn't smart enough. Rose had taped an A+ math test to the refrigerator, the very refrigerator Blake had called garbage. She looked at Gabriel and saw a boy who used to sleep in the booth when his parents locked him out, shivering until Rose draped her own coat over him. "You came back," Rose whispered. Her voice was barely audible over the hum of the kitchen equipment. "You really came back." Gabriel stopped swiveling the stool. The corporate mask fell away completely. He reached across the counter, his hand covering hers. His skin was soft, manicured, a stark contrast to her rough, work-worn knuckles. "We never left, Mama," Gabriel said softly. "We just went to get the tools we needed to fix the roof." Sarah laughed, a wet, choked sound. She wiped her eyes with the back of her dirty hand, leaving a smudge of mascara and mud. "And the plumbing. I checked the basement last week, Mama. The pipes are a disaster. I'm going to have to repipe the whole place. Last week? Rose blinked, confusion mixing with the relief. You were here last week? I was the one measuring the foundation, Sarah admitted, a sheepish smile touching her lips. I had to wear a mask so you wouldn't recognize me. I needed to make sure the building could handle the renovation. Marcus leaned forward, resting his chin on his folded hands. The menacing lawyer was gone, replaced by the boy who used to beg for extra fries. And I bought the mortgage note from the bank this morning, Rose. Technically, I'm your landlord now, but I'm a terrible landlord. I never collect rent. Rose looked from one to the other, the realization washing over her like a warm tide. They hadn't just shown up today. They had been watching. They had been planning. While she was feeling alone, counting pennies and fighting a losing battle, her children, the ones she thought had forgotten her, were quietly building a fortress around her. She let out a sob, a single sharp sound that broke the last of her composure. She pulled her hand from Gabriel's and covered her face. I thought. She gasped, her shoulders shaking. I thought I was just an old woman with a broken plate. No, Gabriel said, standing up. He walked around the counter. He didn't care about the grease on his expensive shoes. He didn't care about the health code. He walked right into the narrow kitchen space. He opened his arms and pulled the small, trembling woman into a hug that smelled of rain and expensive cologne. You're not old, Mama, he whispered into her gray hair. And the plate didn't break. We just need to put it back together. The storm had passed, leaving behind a wet, glistening world that reflected the neon red of the diner's sign. It was evening now. The closed sign was flipped in the window. But for the first time in years, it didn't feel like a surrender. It felt like a promise of rest. Inside, the fluorescent lights had been dimmed. The only illumination came from the warm yellow bulbs above the counter and the soft glow of the jukebox, which was playing a slow, scratchy Otis Redding track. The smell of victory didn't smell like champagne or cigars. It smelled like tomato soup and grilled cheese with burnt edges. Rose moved behind the counter, but she wasn't working. Not really. She was conducting a symphony of comfort. The griddle hissed softly as she flipped 4 sandwiches. She watched the cheese melt, oozing out the sides to hit the hot metal, crisping up just the way Gabriel liked it. They sat in a row, stripped of their armor. Gabriel had lost the hoodie. He was in a t-shirt that looked too thin for the weather, leaning his elbows on the formica. Sarah had finally taken off the hard hat, her hair falling in messy, tired waves around a face that was scrubbed clean of mud. Marcus had rolled up his sleeves, exposing the ink on his forearms, dipping a spoon into a mug of soup with a gentleness that belied his size. You put too much pepper in this, Mama, Marcus murmured, taking a sip. Just like I remember. It clears the sinuses, Rose said, sliding a plate in front of him. And you always breathe too loud when you had a cold. Sarah laughed, tearing her sandwich in half. The steam rose up, carrying the scent of butter and nostalgia. I can have a crew here by Monday, she said, her voice muffled by a mouthful of bread. We need the south wall reinforced. And the roof. God, Mama, how did you survive last winter with that roof? I had buckets, Rose said simply. She poured coffee into 4 mugs. And I had hope. Gabriel didn't eat immediately. He was staring at the space on the counter where the old plate used to sit, the empty spot that felt like a missing tooth. He reached into the bag he had brought in earlier, the one that had been sitting by his feet. I couldn't fix it today, Gabriel said, his voice quiet. The atmosphere in the room shifted, turning tender. He pulled out a small velvet pouch. Inside were the shards of the white porcelain with the gold rim. He placed them gently on the counter, a jigsaw puzzle of memories. Rose wiped her hands on her apron, her heart giving a small, painful squeeze. "It's trash, Gabe. It's just broken china." "No," Gabriel said. He picked up the largest shard, the one that still held part of the faded gold leaf. "I have a specialist in Kyoto. They do this thing called kintsugi. They fix broken pottery with gold lacquer. They don't hide the cracks, Mama. They highlight them. They say the piece is more beautiful for having been broken." He looked up at her, his eyes fierce and bright in the dim light. "That's us," he said. "That's this place. We're all cracked, Mama. You found us when we were broken pieces. You didn't throw us away. You put us back together." Marcus nodded, swallowing hard. "You glued us back together with soup and stubbornness." Sarah reached out and squeezed Rose's hand. "So, we're going to fix the plate. And we're going to fix the walls. And we're going to make sure that no one, not Blake, not the bank, not the devil himself, ever touches this house again." Rose looked at them. She looked at the successful man who used to steal bread because he was starving. She looked at the brilliant engineer who used to think she was stupid. She looked at the fierce lawyer who used to be afraid of his own shadow. She realized then that she hadn't just been cooking meals for 40 years. She had been building a family. The diner wasn't the mortar and bricks. The diner was them. She reached out and touched the shard in Gabriel's hand. The sharp edge was cold, but her fingers were warm. "Eat your sandwich," Rose commanded, her voice thick with an emotion she refused to let spill over into tears. "Before it gets cold, I didn't raise you to waste good cheese." They laughed. It was a warm, easy sound that filled the empty spaces of the room, pushing back the shadows of the looming demolition that would never happen. Outside, the street was dark and quiet. A single car drove past, its tires hissing on the wet pavement. The driver glanced over at the old diner on the corner. From the street, it looked small and insignificant against the backdrop of the rising city skyline. But inside, the light was golden. Inside, 4 people sat huddled over steaming mugs, safe in the fortress they had built for each other. The broken pieces were gathered on the counter, waiting to be made whole again, stronger than they were before. Rose took a sip of her coffee. It tasted like tomorrow. "You know, folks, they say you can tell a lot about a person by how they treat someone who can do absolutely nothing for them." Blake saw a dirty diner and a broken plate. But those boys, they saw a sanctuary. It makes you think, doesn't it? We've all had a Mama Rose in our lives at some point. Someone who gave us a chance, or maybe just a warm meal when we felt invisible. I want to hear from you. Who was that person for you? Or better yet, what is the one meal that instantly tastes like home to you? Is it grilled cheese with burnt edges? Is it your grandma's Sunday pot roast? Or maybe just a simple bowl of soup on a rainy day? Drop a comment down below. I read them all, and honestly, your stories are the best part of my day. And if this story warmed your heart a little bit today, do me a favor and click that subscribe button. We're building our own little family right here on this channel, and there's always an empty seat at the counter for you. Now, wipe those tears, because you won't believe what happens in our next story. We're heading to a dusty antique shop in Ohio, where a rude collector tries to cheat an old veteran out of a rusted pocket watch, only to find out that watch is the key to a 50-year-old mystery. Click right here to watch it. I'll see you there. I'll